The Arizona sun burned like molten iron on Charlotte River's skin as they dragged her to the center of town. Her copper hair, tangled after 7 years of solitude in the desert, gleamed like living embers under the merciless light. Silver Creek had become an amphitheater for her humiliation. The woman the inhabitants called the Canyon Sorceress was now merely a carnival spectacle, a wild curiosity to observe from the safe distance of contempt. Dust clung to her parched lips while the crowd murmured. She could feel each stare like needles on her weathered skin. Charlotte kept her head high, but inside, a whirlwind of contradictory sensations consumed her. It wasn't fear that gripped her, but a kind of ancestral sadness, as if the weight of generations of misunderstanding fell upon her shoulders. The auctioneer presented her with words that turned her survival into an act of barbarism. She speaks with wolves, deflects bullets, walks among serpents. Each lie was another chain on her wrists, each look a judgment without trial. When the auction began, Charlotte observed the faces of those bidding for her. Greedy eyes, twisted smiles, hands eager to possess the untamable. Among them stood out Marcus Caldwell, the mine owner, whose jackal smile widened with each bid. Golden dust floated in the air, and Charlotte thought that even the light seemed corrupted in his presence. It was then that she saw him. A tall man with broad shoulders and deep eyes, who didn't participate in the collective frenzy. He remained silent, observing not as one who looks at merchandise, but as one who recognizes an untold story. When he finally raised his voice, the deep sound broke the hot air like distant thunder. $300. The hammer struck the wood with a sound that reverberated in Charlotte's bones. She had been sold to that stranger, Nathan Steele, owner of the Crimson Ridge Ranch. When he approached her, Charlotte prepared to encounter the same possessive gaze she had seen in the others, but what she found was different. His eyes, the color of earth after rain, looked at her as one looks at someone whose wounds are painfully familiar. "I knew your father," he whispered in a voice so low that only she could hear. "And I know he wasn't a bandit." Those words slipped through the cracks in the armor Charlotte had built over the years. For an instant, she felt something inside her tremble, like water stirred after a long time of stillness. The road to Crimson Ridge Ranch wound between rock formations that seemed like ancient guardians of forgotten time. Charlotte, sitting in the wagon beside Nathan, kept her gaze fixed on the horizon where sky and earth merged in a diffuse line. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but expectant, like the air before a summer storm. The ranch appeared before her eyes like an improbable promise, an oasis of life in the middle of arid immensity. The main house, built with pine wood and local stone, seemed to have grown from the earth itself. Around it, small buildings were distributed like satellites around an earthly sun. Stopping in front of the house, Charlotte perceived movement behind the curtains. Eyes studying her, judgments forming. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the dry air perfumed with wild sage. The scent reminded her of her childhood, of simpler times, when her father still lived, and the river's name wasn't synonymous with disgrace. "This will be your home now," said Nathan, and the word home resonated strangely in Charlotte's ears, like a language long forgotten. On the porch awaited them a black man of indefinable age, tall as a cypress with hands that spoke of years working the land. Beside him, a middle-aged Mexican woman with a thick braid and eyes that seemed to have seen everything. "Benjamin, my foreman," Nathan introduced. "And Rosa, who keeps this place standing with more efficiency than all of us combined." Charlotte noticed that Benjamin observed her not with distrust, but with composed curiosity. His eyes reflected the recognition of a soul that, like hers, had known marginalization. Rosa, for her part, studied her from head to toe before nodding imperceptibly, as if she had passed some invisible test. It was then that she saw him, partially hidden behind the doorframe, a boy of about 16, with the same tone of eyes as Nathan, but with a shadow in them that spoke of early losses. Samuel, the son who hadn't spoken since finding his mother dead 3 years ago. Their gazes crossed like two comets in the darkness. Charlotte recognized in his eyes the same pain she carried inside, the loneliness of the survivor, the burden of continuing to breathe when others no longer could. It was a fleeting instant, as the boy disappeared into the house like a mirage. That night, while Rosa showed her the small room that would be hers, Charlotte felt the weight of years of solitude on her shoulders. The bed, with its straw-filled mattress and clean sheets that smelled of lye soap, seemed an incomprehensible luxury, after years sleeping on hard ground. "Mr. Steele isn't like the others," Rosa said while placing a basin of fresh water on the dresser. "He has his reasons for bringing you here." "What reasons?" asked Charlotte, her voice hoarse from disuse. Rosa looked at her with eyes that contained ancient secrets. "That you must discover yourself, daughter. The answers we seek are sometimes buried like seeds, waiting for the right moment to sprout." When she was alone, Charlotte approached the small window. The moon illuminated the landscape, transforming it into a silver sea. She felt a solitary tear slide down her cheek, the first in many years. She didn't know if it was from relief, fear, or a strange mixture of both. For the first time in 7 years, she would sleep under a roof, surrounded by human voices. The idea terrified and comforted her in equal parts. The first days at Crimson Ridge passed like a fevered dream for Charlotte. Accustomed to the wild freedom of the desert, the wooden walls sometimes seemed to close in on her like a trap. In those moments, she would go out to the porch and breathe deeply, letting the immensity of the landscape calm her anxiety. Nathan treated her with a respectful distance that Charlotte didn't know how to interpret. It wasn't the indifference of a master toward his property, but something more complex, as if he feared breaking something fragile with precipitous approach. He had assigned her simple tasks, helping Rosa in the kitchen, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, tasks that kept her busy without overwhelming her. In the afternoons, when the heat loosened its implacable grip, Nathan allowed her to ride horseback. Charlotte always chose the same mare, a sorrel with golden mane that seemed to share her indomitable spirit. They rode together, sometimes in silence, other times exchanging brief observations about the landscape or clouds that presaged rain. "Why did you buy me?" asked Charlotte one afternoon, while they contemplated the sun sinking behind distant mountains. Nathan took time to respond, as if carefully choosing his words. "Your father saved my life once. I was lost in the desert, delirious with thirst. He found me and took me to his cabin. He cared for me until I could ride again." Charlotte felt something tighten in her throat. The image of her father, Thomas Rivers, emerged from the depths of her memory. A tall, thin man with kind eyes and rough hands that knew how to be incredibly gentle when healing a wound or caressing her childish hair. When they accused him of stealing gold from Caldwell's mine, I tried to testify in his favor, Nathan continued. No one wanted to listen to me. "And afterward you disappeared. Some said you had died, others that you had become a desert spirit." A sad smile drew on Charlotte's lips. "A spirit, a witch, a demon. I've been many things in the stories they tell around campfires. And what are you really, Charlotte Rivers?" The question floated between them like a feather in the air. Charlotte contemplated her hands, weathered by sun and hard work. "Sometimes I don't even know myself," she finally responded, her voice barely a whisper that the wind carried away. During those weeks, Charlotte began to notice Samuel's constant presence. The boy observed her from afar, following her with his gaze while she performed her tasks. It wasn't hostile surveillance, but curious, as if she were an enigma he was trying to solve. One morning, while collecting eggs in the hen house, Charlotte found a small drawing made with charcoal on a piece of yellowed paper. It was rough but expressive, a portrait of herself looking toward the horizon. With her hair like flames trapped on paper, she kept it in her skirt pocket, an unexpected small treasure. That afternoon, while Rosa taught her to make tortillas, Charlotte dared to ask about Samuel. "The boy hasn't spoken since he found his mother," Rosa said, her hands working the dough with precise and rhythmic movements. Mrs. Eleanor was a gentle soul. They found her hanged in the barn. She left a letter saying she couldn't bear life here anymore. Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. And Nathan, how did he bear it? Rosa sighed, a sound laden with years and sorrows. Like strong men bear it, keeping everything inside until the pain becomes stone. Since then, he's devoted himself to Samuel and the ranch, and nothing else. That night, while the house slept, Charlotte went out to the porch. The full moon bathed the landscape with its silver light, turning shadows into ethereal creatures. Sitting on the wooden steps, she allowed her thoughts to wander freely for the first time since her arrival. She perceived movement to her right and turned her head. Samuel was there like a silent apparition. Without saying anything, he sat beside her, maintaining a prudent distance. They remained thus for a long while, two wounded souls under the starry mantle of Arizona's sky, Finally, Charlotte extracted the drawing from her pocket. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "Thank you." Samuel didn't respond, but his eyes, illuminated by moonlight, shone with an emotion that words could never adequately express. That shared silence was the beginning of their own language, more eloquent than any conversation. Charlotte's room had become a refuge. Small details transformed the space. Wildflowers in a glass jar on the dresser, stones collected during her rides lined up on the windowsill, Samuel's drawing pinned with a tack to the wall. Signs of a life beginning to take root, fearful but persistent. One night after dinner, Nathan invited her to his study. It was an austere but cozy room, with bookshelves full of books and maps of the region pinned to the walls. A kerosene lamp projected dancing shadows over the objects, giving them their own life. "I have something to show you," said Nathan, heading to a dark wooden trunk in a corner. He opened it with a key he wore hanging from his neck and extracted an object wrapped in chamois cloth. With reverence, he placed it on the desk and removed the cloth, revealing a leather diary worn by use and time. "Your father's diary," he explained at Charlotte's astonished look. "I found it among his belongings after they hanged him." Charlotte held her breath. Her fingers trembled as they approached the diary, as if she feared it might vanish at her touch. The texture of leather under her fingertips awakened dormant memories. Her father writing by candlelight, the scratching of the pen on paper, his concentrated face while recording his thoughts. "Have you read it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nathan nodded gravely, enough to know that your father discovered a gold vein on your property, and that he suspected Caldwell knew it. Charlotte's eyes rose, burning with an intensity that made Nathan step back imperceptibly. "Are you saying Caldwell killed him for the gold?" "I have no proof, only suspicions. But I believe your father didn't commit suicide, as they said. And I believe the theft accusation was fabricated to discredit him." Charlotte opened the diary with trembling hands. Her father's neat, angular handwriting filled the pages with observations about the weather, mineral findings, personal reflections. It was like hearing his voice after so many years of silence. A tear fell on the paper, slightly blurring the ink. "Why are you showing me this now?" she asked, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. Nathan sat across from her, his eyes reflecting the yellowish light of the lamp. "Because I believe you deserve to know the truth. And because I need your help to find evidence against Caldwell." The proposal hung between them like a cloud charged with electricity. Charlotte closed the diary and pressed it against her chest, as if wanting to absorb her father's essence through it. "Tell me everything," she said finally, her voice firm despite the emotional turmoil shaking her inside. That night, while Nathan spread maps and documents on the desk, Charlotte felt the purpose she had lost 7 years ago beginning to be reborn inside her. She was no longer just a survivor, an anomaly, a curiosity. She was Thomas Rivers' daughter, and she had a mission: to clear her father's name and confront the man who had destroyed her family. When she returned to her room, hours later, she found a small object on her pillow that gleamed under the moonlight streaming through the window. It was a silver locket, simple but beautiful. Opening it, she discovered inside a lock of blonde hair and a miniature portrait of a sweet-faced woman with sad eyes. "Eleanor," she whispered. Recognizing Nathan's deceased wife, she knew immediately who had left it there. It was Samuel's most precious treasure, and he had entrusted it to her. A gesture of trust so profound it made her heart contract. That night, for the first time since her arrival at Crimson Ridge, Charlotte cried herself to sleep. They weren't tears of desperation, but of a complex emotion she couldn't name. A mixture of pain for what was lost and hope for what might come. The waning moon barely illuminated the landscape when Charlotte woke with a start. An instinct developed during years of solitude had alerted her. Something wasn't right. She got up stealthily and approached the window, scrutinizing the darkness with eyes accustomed to reading the night. Then she saw them, shadows moving between the ranch buildings, figures sliding like predators stalking their prey. They weren't wild animals, but men, 5, maybe 6, armed. She didn't have time to dress. She took the rifle Nathan had given her days earlier. For hunting, he had said, though both knew it wasn't just about rabbits or deer, and went barefoot into the hallway. The wood creaked under her bare feet as she headed to Samuel's room. The boy slept deeply, oblivious to the danger looming over them. Charlotte woke him with a hand over his mouth to prevent any sound. "Intruders," she whispered when she saw recognition in his eyes. "Stay here under the bed. Don't come out until I come for you." Samuel nodded, his face pale in the penumbra. Charlotte squeezed his shoulder briefly before slipping out of the room toward Nathan's. She found him already awake, loading his revolver. Their gazes met in tacit understanding. They needed no words to coordinate their defense. While Nathan woke Benjamin, Charlotte positioned herself by an upstairs window. From there she had a clear view of the courtyard. Her familiarity with night, acquired during her years in the desert, gave her an advantage the intruders couldn't suspect. The first shot tore the silence like a knife. The bullet embedded in the wall, centimeters from where Charlotte had been seconds before. She responded with precision, and one of the attackers fell with a muffled cry. The battle was brief but intense. Benjamin, stationed on the back porch, brought down 2 men. Nathan wounded another trying to enter through the kitchen. The rest fled, disappearing into the night darkness like specters. When silence returned, broken only by the wounded man's moans, Charlotte ran to Samuel's room. She found him where she had left him, trembling but unharmed. Seeing her, he came out of his hiding place and, to Charlotte's surprise, threw himself into her arms. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact, and the gesture moved her beyond words. While she held him, feeling his heart beat rapidly against hers, Charlotte understood that she was no longer fighting only for her father's memory. She was also fighting for this silent boy, for Nathan, for Rosa and Benjamin, for this strange family she had found when she no longer expected to belong anywhere. At dawn, Nathan interrogated the wounded man. He was a known gunslinger for hire, and although he denied working for Caldwell, the handkerchief with the initials MC in his pocket belied him. "Now he knows we're after him," said Nathan, while Rosa tended to a cut on his arm, result of the skirmish. "So we must move quickly." Charlotte, sitting by the window with the rifle still across her lap, nodded. The rising sun gilded her hair, turning it into a crown of fire. "We have to go to my father's cabin," she said. "If there's evidence, it will be there." The decision was made. They would leave the next day for the mountains, where the ruins of the river's property lay. It was a dangerous journey, not only because of Caldwell's threat, but because of the treacherous terrain and the possibility of encountering hostile Apaches. That afternoon, while they prepared provisions for the trip, Charlotte found Samuel in the stable, brushing the sorrel mare she usually rode. She approached silently, watching him work with gentle, methodical movements. "Thank you for the locket," she said finally. "I'll guard it with my life." Samuel stopped brushing and looked at her, his eyes expressing what his voice couldn't. Slowly, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. It was another drawing, but this one wasn't of her. It was a portrait of Nathan, Benjamin, Rosa, himself, and Charlotte, all together in front of the house. A family. Charlotte felt something crumble inside her, like an ancient wall yielding under the pressure of roots growing between its stones. She took the drawing with trembling hands and looked at it for a long time. "It's beautiful, Samuel, but I don't know if—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't know how to express the fear that gripped her, the terror that all this was temporary, that in the end she would be alone again. Samuel seemed to understand her without need for words. He took her hand and squeezed it with surprising strength for someone so young. In that contact, Charlotte felt a silent promise. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Dawn found Charlotte and Nathan riding eastward, where the mountains drew bluish silhouettes against the clear sky. They had decided to travel alone to avoid leaving the ranch unprotected. Benjamin would stay in charge with strict orders not to let Samuel stray from the property under any circumstances. The farewell had been brief but intense. Rosa had given them a bag with tortillas, dried meat, and coffee, plus medicinal herbs just in case. Benjamin had provided an additional shotgun and enough ammunition to face a small army, according to his words. Samuel, surprisingly, had hugged Charlotte before she mounted, a gesture so unexpected it left her breathless. Now, as they advanced along increasingly steep paths, Charlotte felt a mixture of anticipation and fear. Returning to the cabin where she had grown up, where she had been happy before the world collapsed, was like walking toward a long-avoided dream. "Are you all right?" asked Nathan, breaking the silence that had settled between them since departure. Charlotte nodded, though the truth was more complex. She was reliving memories as the landscape became more familiar. That twisted pine where her father had taught her to shoot, the turtle-shaped rock where they used to rest during their excursions, and the stream where she had learned to swim. My father said these mountains had memory, she said finally, that they kept all the stories of those who had passed through them. Nathan looked at her with an expression Charlotte couldn't interpret. And do you believe it? Charlotte contemplated the rock formations rising around them, ancient and permanent, while humans passed like ephemeral shadows. There are days when I can feel the whispers, she responded, as if the wind carried fragments of past lives. At midday they made a stop by a small spring. While the horses drank, they shared a silent lunch. The intimacy of that moment, away from any gaze, created between them a different space. They were no longer the rancher and the wild woman he had bought at an auction. They were two people united by a common purpose, by a search that transcended their individual stories. "How did you survive all these years?" asked Nathan while they gathered their things to continue the journey. Charlotte stopped, considering the question. No one had asked her before, as if her survival were a given fact, not an extraordinary achievement. At first it was difficult, she admitted. I was 16 and alone, scared. I fled when they came looking for me after my father. I hid in the mountains, in caves. I learned to hunt, to recognize edible plants. Sometimes I stole from isolated farms, a chicken, some corn. Enough to survive, never more. She didn't mention the nights of extreme cold, the days of atrocious hunger, the fevers that left her delirious under the implacable sun. She didn't speak of the loneliness that was sometimes so dense she could feel it as a physical weight on her chest. I survived because I didn't know what else to do, she concluded, mounting again. Breathing was the only thing I had left. Nathan looked at her for a long time before getting on his own horse. You're extraordinary, Charlotte Rivers. The words, said with a simplicity that made them even more powerful, lodged somewhere deep inside her. For the rest of the day, as they ascended increasingly difficult paths, Charlotte felt them resonate inside her like an echo in a canyon. At nightfall, the cabin appeared before them like a mirage. Or rather, what remained of it. The roof had partially collapsed. The windows were black holes without glass. The door hung from a single hinge. Nature had begun to reclaim it. Vines climbed the walls. Small bushes grew between the porch boards. Charlotte dismounted slowly, as if in a trance. Each step toward the cabin was a step toward her past. Fragmented images paraded before her eyes. Her father carving wooden figures by the fire. Herself learning to read from worn books. Her mother's laughter. A more distant memory, almost faded, filling the now silent and desolate space. Nathan stayed back, respecting her moment of reunion. Only when he saw her stop at the threshold, as if an invisible barrier prevented her from entering, did he approach and place a hand on her shoulder. He said nothing, but his solid presence gave Charlotte the courage she needed to cross the threshold toward her lost childhood. The interior was as if suspended in time. A layer of dust covered the few remaining pieces of furniture. A rustic table, an overturned chair, empty shelves on the walls. In a corner, remains of what had been her father's bed. The hearth where a welcoming fire once burned was now a black hole full of old ashes. Charlotte advanced as if in a dream, touching objects, recognizing fragments of her previous life. She stopped in front of a wall where an oval mirror still hung, miraculously intact. She looked at herself in it, and for an instant saw not the woman hardened by sun and hardships, but the girl she had been, with luminous eyes full of trust in the world. "We must search before it gets completely dark," said Nathan softly, returning her to the present. Charlotte nodded, wiping away a furtive tear. She headed to the corner where her father's bed had been and began feeling the floorboards. One of them moved under her fingers. She lifted it, revealing a hollow. "Here," she called to Nathan. "Help me." Together they removed more boards, widening the hole. Below, wrapped in a piece of waxed canvas, they found an iron box the size of a large book. The lock was rusty, but Nathan managed to force it with his knife after several attempts. The contents made Charlotte's heart stop for an instant. The family Bible with birth and death records, faded photographs, legal documents, and at the bottom, a detailed map with annotations in her father's handwriting, indicating the exact location of the gold vein. And most importantly, the original deed to the property, where it clearly stated that the mine legally belonged to Thomas Rivers. "We have it," whispered Charlotte, her voice trembling. This proves my father didn't steal anything. The mine was his. Nathan examined the documents in the dying light entering through the broken windows. This is enough to take him to justice, he confirmed. But it doesn't prove Caldwell killed him. Charlotte pressed the documents against her chest. It's a beginning, she said, and for the first time in years, she felt that hope wasn't a trap, but a real possibility. They decided to spend the night in the cabin. Nathan repaired the door as best he could, while Charlotte cleaned a space on the floor to spread their blankets. They lit a small fire in the hearth, and its dancing light projected shadows that seemed like ghosts of the past moving on the walls. Sitting in front of the fire, sharing a canteen of whiskey Nathan had brought, they spoke in low voices, as if they feared disturbing the spirits of the place. Charlotte told him stories of her childhood, of her father's lessons about the stars, plants, animals. Nathan told her about his arrival in Arizona from Tennessee, how he had built Crimson Ridge from scratch, his marriage to Eleanor, the joy he felt when Samuel was born. Eleanor was beautiful, said Charlotte, remembering the portrait in the locket. But she seemed sad. Nathan looked at the flames, his face suddenly somber. She was. The desert consumed her. She missed Boston, her family, city life. I tried to make her happy, but he didn't finish the sentence. It wasn't necessary. The silence between them filled with mutual understanding, with recognition of shared losses. At some point in the night, while the flames reduced to embers, their hands met on the blanket. It was a brief contact, almost accidental, but charged with meaning. Neither mentioned it, but both felt it. A bridge stretched over the abyss of their pasts, a fragile but real possibility of a different future. The return had to be quick. With the documents secured in Nathan's saddlebag, they set out at dawn, opting for a more direct route, though more exposed. The anxiety to return to Crimson Ridge, to secure their discovery, pushed them to an accelerated pace. The sun had reached its zenith when Charlotte perceived the danger. An instinct developed during years of survival made her notice small details. The sudden silence of birds, a distant dust cloud moving against the wind. The horse's nervousness. "We're being followed," she said in a low voice, leaning toward Nathan without stopping her mount. Nathan didn't question her perception. He had learned to trust Charlotte's sharpened senses, her almost supernatural reading of the environment. "How many?" "I can't know for certain. At least 3, maybe more." They exchanged a look charged with understanding. They couldn't outrun their pursuers on that treacherous terrain. They would have to face them. There, Nathan pointed toward a rock formation rising about 200 meters away. "We can take position and have the advantage." They spurred their horses, galloping toward the rocks. They had barely covered half the distance when the first shot tore the air, raising a dust cloud centimeters from Charlotte's horse. The ambush had begun. They managed to reach the protection of the rocks under a rain of bullets. They dismounted quickly, leading the frightened animals behind the formation. Nathan drew his revolver while Charlotte prepared the rifle. "Cy Caldwell's men," said Nathan after taking a cautious look. "I recognize 2 of them from Silver Creek." Charlotte breathed deeply, calming her pulse. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford now. "I'll shoot first," she said, resting the rifle on a flat rock. "When I do, they'll reveal their positions. Then you shoot." The strategy worked. Charlotte's accurate shot brought down one of the attackers, causing the others to shoot hastily, revealing their hiding spots. Nathan took advantage to wound another. The remaining ones, now they could see there were 5 in total, retreated, seeking better cover. What followed was a tense exchange of gunfire, a deadly dance where each movement could mean the difference between life and death. Charlotte and Nathan worked in perfect harmony, communicating with minimal gestures, covering each other, maximizing each bullet with calculated precision. In a moment of relative calm, while they reloaded, their gazes met. There was something new in Nathan's eyes, a mixture of admiration and something deeper that Charlotte didn't dare name. In the midst of chaos and danger, that instant crystallized as a refuge of stillness, a mutual recognition that transcended words. The gunfire continued until shadows began to lengthen. The attackers, reduced to 3 and with limited ammunition, finally retreated. Charlotte and Nathan waited, tense until they were sure they had really left. Only then did they allow themselves to relax. Nathan had a cut on his arm where a bullet had grazed the skin. Charlotte tore part of her shirt to improvise a bandage. Her fingers worked delicately on the wound, while Nathan watched her with an intensity that made her cheeks flush. "You're good at this," he commented, I had a lot of practice taking care of myself, she responded, securing the bandage knot. When she finished, her hands remained on Nathan's arm a second longer than necessary. He covered one of them with his, a warm and firm contact that sent a current down Charlotte's spine. "Thank you," he said simply, but his eyes expressed much more. They decided not to risk traveling at night. They camped right there among the rocks, sharing a frugal meal and taking turns keeping watch. During her turn, while Nathan slept, Charlotte contemplated the stars. So bright and close they seemed she could touch them if she stretched out her hand. She thought about everything that had changed in recent weeks. How she had gone from being a solitary creature, more animal than human according to some, to being part of something greater than herself. She thought about Samuel and his eloquent silence, about Rosa and her wise hands, about Benjamin and his quiet dignity. She thought about Nathan, his stubborn honor, his kindness hidden under layers of reserve, and she realized, with a clarity that scared and comforted her at the same time, that she could no longer imagine a life without them. This search for justice for her father had also become a search for home. And perhaps, just perhaps, she had already found it. At dawn they resumed their journey, alert to any sign of danger. But the road remained clear. By midday the familiar contours of Crimson Ridge appeared on the horizon, and something inside Charlotte expanded, like unfurled wings. It was a strange sensation, almost forgotten, the feeling of coming home. The ranch was unusually quiet when they arrived, too quiet. Charlotte felt a chill of apprehension run down her back as they dismounted in front of the main house. Something wasn't right. Her fears were confirmed when Benjamin came out to the porch, his usually impassive face now marked by lines of concern. "We have visitors," he said simply, stepping aside so they could enter. In the living room, sitting erect in one of the armchairs, as if the furniture could contaminate her, was a woman of about 40, dressed with the elegant sobriety of one accustomed to moving in society's most respectable circles. Beside her, half hidden in shadow, was another female figure, younger and more fragile. Nathan, the older woman, stood up, extending a gloved hand. "As unpunctual as always. Clara," he responded, briefly kissing the offered hand. "I didn't expect to see you here." Charlotte observed the exchange with caution, noting the tense familiarity between them. It was then that the younger woman moved, and the window light illuminated her face. The world stopped for Charlotte. The air froze in her lungs. It was a face she knew better than her own, though now marked by time and hardships, eyes the same green tone as hers, the same soft curve of cheek, the same dimple beside the mouth. "Victoria," her voice barely a broken whisper. The young woman stood up, swaying slightly. "Charlotte," she responded, and in that single word were years of absence, loss, longing. Charlotte's arms opened by themselves, and her sister, her little sister, whom she had given up for dead during 7 long years, rushed into them like a wounded bird returning to its nest. They embraced with the desperation of those who fear that letting go might separate them again. Tears ran freely down their faces, mixing on their joined cheeks. "I looked for you," sobbed Charlotte, caressing her sister's hair, darker than hers, but with the same copper reflections. "I looked for you until I thought you had—" "I know." Victoria pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "I looked for you too." "But they told me you had died in the desert." The older woman, Clara, Nathan had said, contemplated the scene with an indecipherable expression. Only when the sisters finally separated, still holding hands as if they feared the other might vanish, did she intervene. "I am Dr. Clara Whitmore," she introduced herself. "I found Miss Victoria 3 years ago in a Tucson hospice, very ill with tuberculosis. I've been caring for her since then." Charlotte nodded in gratitude, though there was something about the doctor that unsettled her. Perhaps it was the way her eyes, so pale blue they seemed colorless, never stayed still, always evaluating, calculating. "I thank you for caring for my sister," she said formally. "But how did you know where to find me?" A tense silence followed her question. It was Victoria who finally responded, her voice barely audible. "I told her. I knew you were here because I've been working for Mr. Caldwell." The words fell like stones in a still pond. Charlotte released her sister's hands, stepping back. "Caldwell? The man who accused our father of robbery? The man who probably killed him?" Victoria lowered her gaze, her face contracted with shame and pain. "I didn't know," she whispered. Not at first. I was alone, sick. He offered me work as a companion for his wife. He promised he would help me find you. He used you," Nathan's voice was hard as granite, "to spy, to keep us watched." Victoria nodded, silent tears rolling down her pale cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Charlotte. When I knew the truth, it was too late. I was trapped." Charlotte felt as if the ground had opened under her feet. The joy of reunion had transformed into sharp pain, into confusion that left her breathless. But before she could respond, the main door burst open. Marcus Caldwell entered like a storm, followed by Sheriff Montgomery and 2 armed deputies. His face, normally composed in a mask of civility, now showed his true nature, cruel, greedy, without remorse. "Well, well," he smiled, his cold eyes passing from Nathan to Charlotte. "The family reunion is complete." Charlotte tensed, ready to jump, but Nathan's hand on her arm stopped her. Sheriff Montgomery stepped forward, unfolding a sealed paper. "Charlotte Rivers, you are under arrest for the murder of bounty hunter William Dobbs, which occurred 6 months ago in Cochise territory." Charlotte blinked. "Confused. I haven't killed anyone." Caldwell laughed, a sound without joy. "We have a witness who saw you shoot Dobbs in the back, Miss Rivers. A signed and sworn testimony." Nathan stepped between Charlotte and the sheriff. "This is absurd. There must be a mistake." "No mistake, Steele," Caldwell replied. "Your little savage is a murderer, and you've been harboring a fugitive." The tension in the room was so dense it could be cut. Charlotte felt everything crumbling around her. After finding the evidence, after reuniting with her sister, now she faced an accusation that could take her to the gallows. It was then that the unthinkable happened. A voice that no one had heard in 3 years broke the silence, hoarse from disuse but clear and firm. "Lie." Everyone turned towards Samuel, who had entered silently and now pointed an accusing finger at Caldwell. It was him. The boy continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "I saw him. He killed that man and blamed Charlotte. And he also killed my mother." The silence that followed this declaration was absolute. Caldwell visibly paled but recovered quickly. "The boy is delirious," he said, forcing a laugh. "He hasn't spoken in years and now he comes out with these fantasies." "They're not fantasies," Dr. Whitmore stepped forward, her voice surprisingly firm. "Eleanor Steele didn't commit suicide. I examined her body. The bruises on her neck didn't match self-induced hanging." "And the suicide note," added Victoria, trembling but determined. "He made me deliver it. He said it was a letter for Mrs. Steele, but it was a false suicide note." Caldwell looked around. "Third?" His eyes stopped on Victoria, and something in them changed. In a surprisingly quick movement for his corpulence, he grabbed her, placing a revolver against her temple. "Back, everyone," he ordered. "If anyone moves, I'll blow her head off." Charlotte stepped forward, hands extended in a pleading gesture. "Marcus, please. She's my sister. Let her go. I'll surrender voluntarily. Too late to negotiate, witch." Caldwell spat, backing toward the door, dragging Victoria with him. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds. Victoria, in a desperate burst of courage, twisted violently in Caldwell's grip. The shot resonated in the room like thunder. Charlotte screamed, lunging forward. Nathan, in a fluid movement, drew and fired. Caldwell fell heavily, a clean hole in the center of his forehead. The revolver slid from his lifeless hand. Beside him, Victoria held her shoulder, blood seeping between her fingers. "Victoria!" Charlotte knelt beside her sister, frantically examining the wound. "I'm fine," Victoria murmured weakly. "It only grazed me." Dr. Whitmore was already beside them, opening her medical bag. "Let me see," she ordered with professional calm. "Sheriff, I'll need clean water and bandages." Sheriff Montgomery, who had observed the entire scene with growing understanding, nodded and quickly left the room. "Nathan Steele," said one of the sheriff's deputies, approaching with his hand on his weapon, "you'll have to come with us. You've killed a man." "In self-defense and defense of others," Nathan responded without alteration. "And you just heard testimony that Caldwell was responsible for at least 2 murders. The deputy hesitated, looking at Caldwell's body and then at Samuel, who remained motionless by the window, his eyes fixed on the man who had killed his mother. "We'll let the judge decide," he said finally, lowering his hand. "But you'll have to testify when the time comes." Charlotte, holding her sister's hand while the doctor worked on her wound, looked at Nathan across the room. Their eyes met in the midst of chaos, and something passed between them, a silent promise, a recognition of everything they had lived through together and everything still to come. The path to justice had been tortuous and stained with blood, but finally the truth had come to light. There was much yet to resolve, many wounds to heal. But for the first time in 7 years, Charlotte felt that the future wasn't just a threat, but also a promise. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Silver Creek buzzed with rumors and revelations following Marcus Caldwell's death. Sheriff Montgomery, freed from the mine magnate's corrupting influence, conducted a thorough investigation that brought to light years of manipulation, bribes, and crimes. At Crimson Ridge, a different silence had settled, not the tense silence of anticipation or fear, but the comforting silence that follows a devastating storm, a silence of healing. Victoria recovered slowly under the combined care of Dr. Whitmore and Rosa. The shoulder wound healed well, but the tuberculosis that had weakened her body for years required constant attention. Charlotte barely left her side, as if she feared that leaving her alone might make her vanish again. During the long hours beside her sister's bed, Charlotte told her everything: the years in the desert, the capture, the auction, how Nathan had bought her, and offered not only shelter but also respect, not only security but also purpose. She spoke of Samuel and his now broken silence, of Benjamin and Rosa, of how this strange group of people had become something like a family. Victoria, in turn, spoke of her own journey. How after their father's death, she had been taken in by a family of miners, who then abandoned her in Tucson when she fell ill. Of the years in the hospice, the cold and hunger, the desperation, how Caldwell had found her and used her, making her believe he would help her reunite with Charlotte. "I was so afraid," she confessed one afternoon, while the setting sun bathed the room in golden light. "I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I saw no other way out. He had convinced me you were dead, and then when I knew you were alive and here, I couldn't bear it anymore. I had to see you, even if it meant betraying Caldwell." Charlotte squeezed her hand, feeling the weak but steady pulse under the delicate skin. "You don't need to explain," she said softly. "What matters is that we're together now." But it wasn't only Victoria who needed healing. Samuel, after breaking his long silence, seemed overwhelmed by everything he had kept locked inside for 3 years. Sometimes he woke screaming in the middle of the night, reliving the moment he had found his mother dead. Other times he would freeze mid-sentence as if words stuck in his throat. Nathan, for his part, faced his own demons. Although the preliminary investigation clearly indicated he had acted in self-defense and defense of others, the fact of having killed a man, however justified, weighed on his conscience. He spent long hours riding alone or sitting on the porch staring at distant mountains with an indecipherable expression. Charlotte watched him, respecting his space, but offering her silent presence when he needed it. One night, while they shared coffee on the porch after everyone had retired, Nathan spoke of Eleanor for the first time since Caldwell's death. "I knew something didn't fit," he said, his voice barely audible over the cricket's song. The note didn't sound like her. And Eleanor. She never would have left Samuel like that, voluntarily. But I convinced myself I was looking for excuses, denying reality. Charlotte remained silent, allowing the words to flow like long-contained water. "I should have investigated more. I should have questioned. Maybe if I had—" "You can't torture yourself with what might have been," Charlotte interrupted softly. "Caldwell deceived everyone. He was skilled at manipulating, creating false truths. He even deceived my sister, who is one of the most intuitive people I know." Nathan looked at her, his eyes reflecting the nascent moon's silver gleam. "How do you do it?" he asked with genuine curiosity. "Do what?" "Survive without the pain destroying you. You lost your father, were separated from your sister, lived years in conditions that would have killed most. And yet here you are, whole, strong." Charlotte considered the question, seeking an honest answer. "I don't think I'm stronger than others," she said finally. "I just learned to coexist with pain, to incorporate it as part of me without letting it completely define me. Like a wound that heals but leaves a mark. It's always there, but it no longer bleeds constantly." Her words hung in the night air. Nathan nodded slowly, as if he had just understood something fundamental. Then, in a gesture that took Charlotte by surprise, he covered her hand with his. The contact was warm, comforting, and contained a tacit promise. They didn't speak more that night, but something had changed between them. An invisible barrier had fallen like a mature leaf, finally detaching from its branch. Meanwhile, in town, things were also changing. With the truth about Caldwell exposed, the Rivers family reputation began to be rehabilitated. Judge Tanner, who had arrived from Prescott to investigate the numerous charges against the late magnate, personally reviewed Thomas Rivers' case and officially declared his posthumous innocence. More significant still was the discovery, among Caldwell's papers, of documents proving that the mine he had claimed as his actually legally belonged to the Rivers family. The gold vein Thomas had discovered was real, and now his daughters were the rightful owners. One afternoon, almost 3 weeks after Caldwell's death, Sheriff Montgomery arrived at Crimson Ridge with official news. There would be no charges against Nathan for Caldwell's death. The testimonies of multiple witnesses, including those of Samuel and Dr. Whitmore, had been conclusive. Additionally, he brought a letter from Judge Tanner formally communicating to Charlotte and Victoria that they were the legal heirs of the Rivers mine, as well as substantial compensation for years of illegal exploitation. That night, sitting around the kitchen table, they celebrated modestly. Rosa had prepared a feast: roasted meat, beans, fresh tortillas, and apple pie that filled the house with its sweet and comforting aroma. Even Victoria, strong enough to sit at the table for the first time, participated in the dinner. Samuel, though still sparing with words, smiled more often. During dinner, he surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to learn to draw professionally. "Dr. Whitmore says I could study in San Francisco," he said, looking tentatively at his father. "She has a friend who teaches art there." Nathan seemed momentarily stunned, but recovered quickly. "If it's what you really want, we'll find a way," he responded, and the smile that lit Samuel's face was worth more than all the gold mines in Arizona. After dinner, while Rosa and Benjamin cleared the dishes, firmly refusing any help, Charlotte went out to the porch. The night air was cool, perfumed with sage and earth dampened by a light rain that had fallen at sunset. She heard the door open and close softly. Nathan joined her, leaning on the railing. For a while they contemplated the night landscape together, comfortable in their shared silence. "What will you do now?" Nathan finally asked. "With the mine, the compensation?" "You're a wealthy woman, Charlotte Rivers." There was something in his voice, a note of uncertainty Charlotte had never heard before. She turned to look at him directly. "Do you think I'll leave?" she asked softly. Nathan kept his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You have every right. You could go to San Francisco with Samuel or anywhere else. Start over without the shadows of the past." Charlotte moved closer, entering his personal space. "And if I don't want to leave?" Now Nathan did look at her. His eyes, dark under the moon's dim light, contained a mixture of emotions Charlotte had never seen so clearly. Hope, fear, longing. "Then," he said, his voice hoarser than usual, "it would make me very happy if you stayed." It wasn't a dramatic gesture. There were no grandiose declarations or eternal promises. Simply, Charlotte shortened the distance between them and rested her head on Nathan's shoulder. He, after a moment of surprise, put an arm around her shoulders, drawing her to him, and so they remained, contemplating the starry immensity, two silhouettes united against the night's backdrop, finding in that simple contact the promise of all the possibilities the future might bring. Autumn came to Crimson Ridge with fresh winds that stirred the yellowing leaves of the cottonwoods by the stream. Almost 2 months had passed since Caldwell's death, and life had found a new rhythm, calmer and more hopeful. Victoria gained strength day by day. Dr. Whitmore, who had decided to establish herself in Silver Creek after years of itinerant practice, came twice a week to supervise her recovery. With the ranch's clean air, adequate nutrition, and her sister's constant care, Victoria's health improved visibly. Her cheeks, once sunken and pale, began to recover color. Her hair, which had lost its shine during illness, again gleamed with copper tones similar to Charlotte's, though darker. The sisters spent long hours together recovering lost time, rebuilding the bond that circumstances had strained but never broken. Charlotte taught Victoria what she had learned during her years in the desert: how to read the sky to predict weather, how to identify medicinal plants, how to find water in apparently arid terrain. Victoria, for her part, shared the skills she had acquired during her time in the hospice and later at the Caldwell house. Fine sewing, reading musical scores, cooking recipes she had learned by observing the mansion's cooks. One day, while they sewed together on the porch, Victoria brought up a topic that had been tacitly floating between them: "Have you decided what to do with the mine?" she asked without looking up from her work. Charlotte sighed, letting her own embroidery rest on her lap. It was a question she had repeatedly asked herself in recent weeks. "I've been thinking," she responded slowly. "I don't want to become what Caldwell was. I don't want that mine to symbolize for others what it meant for us." Victoria nodded, understanding. "So, I was thinking of establishing a cooperative. The miners could work for fair wages, with dignified conditions and profit participation. We could use part of the earnings to found a school, perhaps a small hospital." A smile illuminated Victoria's face. "Father would be proud," she said simply, and those words meant more to Charlotte than any external validation. While the Rivers sisters rebuilt their relationship, Samuel and Nathan went through their own transformation. Samuel's return of voice had opened the floodgates of long-repressed communication between father and son. They spoke of Eleanor, not as a painful ghost, but as the woman she had been, complex, sometimes contradictory, capable of great love but also deep melancholy. "I don't remember her laughing much," Samuel confessed one afternoon while helping his father repair a section of fence, except when she played piano. It was like she transformed. Nathan nodded, remembering. Music was her refuge. In Boston, she had studied at a conservatory. Here, he made a gesture encompassing the vast, wild landscape. Here she felt disconnected from that part of herself. Is that why she was unhappy? The question, direct and unadorned as only an adolescent's can be, made Nathan stop. He carefully considered his response. "Your mother suffered from what some doctors call melancholy. It wasn't anyone's fault, not even hers. It was like an internal storm that sometimes subsided but never completely disappeared." Samuel absorbed this information in silence, hammering a nail with perhaps more force than necessary. "I miss her," he said finally. "But it doesn't hurt as much to talk about her anymore." Nathan put a hand on his son's shoulder, a simple gesture but charged with meaning. No more words were needed. Charlotte observed these interactions with a mixture of respect and something deeper she still didn't dare fully name. Her relationship with Nathan had evolved gradually but constantly. There had been no grand declarations or dramatic moments, but small gestures, meaningful conversations, gazes that lingered a second longer than necessary. One morning in late October, Charlotte rode alone through the ranch boundaries. The air was fresh and invigorating, with that edge that announces winter's proximity. Her sorrel mare, whom she had finally named Ember for the color of her coat that reminded her of glowing coals, trotted happily beneath her. She reached a hill from where much of Crimson Ridge could be seen, the main house with its red tile roof. The corrals, the barn, the garden Rosa tended with devotion. Beyond, the town of Silver Creek glimpsed like a blurred stain in the distance. She dismounted and sat on a flat rock, allowing Ember to graze freely. From her pocket she extracted a yellowed paper, worn from folding, the wanted poster with her name and a rough drawing of her face, where she was identified as the Canyon Sorceress. She had kept it all these years as a reminder of what the world thought of her, of what she herself had come to believe she was. Now, in the clear light of day, that paper seemed to belong to another life, another person. With a deliberate movement, she tore it into small pieces that the wind scattered like confetti. It was a symbolic gesture, but it felt right, necessary, a way of saying goodbye to the wild and solitary woman she had been, to welcome who she was becoming. Returning to the ranch, she found Nathan on the porch, apparently absorbed in repairing a saddle. But something in the way he looked up when she dismounted told her he had been waiting for her. "Good ride?" he asked, his hands skillfully continuing their work. "Revealing," Charlotte responded, sitting beside him after ensuring Ember was well tended. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Questioning." "I said goodbye to the Canyon Sorceress," she explained with a small smile. "I don't need her anymore." He nodded, understanding the deep meaning behind her words. "And who are you now, if I may ask?" Charlotte considered the question, the same one he had asked her months ago and that she then couldn't answer. "I'm Charlotte Rivers," she said simply. "Victoria's sister, Samuel's friend, co-owner of the Rivers mine and—" She hesitated briefly before adding, with a direct look, "and part of Crimson Ridge. If you'll allow it." Nathan set the saddle aside, turning to face her completely. "Crimson Ridge has been yours since the moment you set foot here," he said with an intensity that made Charlotte's heart skip a beat. "We were simply waiting for you to claim it. It wasn't a calculated or rehearsed movement. It was as natural as the next breath. Charlotte leaned toward him, and Nathan toward her. Their lips met in a soft kiss, tentative at first, then more confident. Nathan's rough hands framed her face with surprising delicacy, while hers clung to his shoulders, as if she feared he might vanish. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Charlotte saw in Nathan's eyes the reflection of what she felt. Wonder, joy, and also a little fear at the enormity of what they were beginning. This won't be easy, he warned, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. There's a lot of past between us. Many wounds still healing. Valuable things are rarely easy, Charlotte responded, covering his hand with hers. But I think it's worth trying, don't you? Nathan's smile, slow and genuine, was all the answer she needed. That night during dinner, an unexpected visitor arrived at Crimson Ridge. Judge Tanner, a middle-aged man with a well-trimmed beard and perceptive eyes, had traveled from Prescott to personally deliver the final documents certifying ownership of the Rivers mine and the corresponding indemnification. Normally I would send these papers with a messenger, he explained while accepting the cup of coffee Rosa offered him. But I felt I should present my respects in person. What your family suffered, Mrs. Rivers, was an injustice that stains our judicial system. I ask for forgiveness on behalf of the Arizona Territory. Victoria, sitting beside Charlotte on the sofa, took her sister's hand. The judge's formal gesture, though it couldn't undo years of suffering, meant much to both of them. Thank you, Your Honor, Charlotte responded. We appreciate your integrity. Judge Tanner's visit marked in some way the formal closure of a painful chapter. When he left the next morning, he left behind not only the legal documents that restored to the Rivers sisters what rightfully belonged to them, but also a sense of conclusion, of justice finally served. That afternoon, Charlotte found Samuel in his usual place by the stream, drawing. She sat silently beside him, respecting his concentration. The drawing taking shape under his skilled hands showed the ranch, but not as it currently was, but as it could be. The house expanded. A new windmill, more extensive gardens, a larger stable. It's beautiful, she commented when Samuel finally set down the charcoal. Is this how you see the future? The boy nodded, a slight blush tingeing his cheeks. If I'm going to study in San Francisco, I want to remember exactly what place I'll return to, he explained. And I want to have ideas to improve it when I come back. Charlotte felt a wave of affection for this young man who had gone from traumatic silence to expressing his dreams with such clarity. You'll always have a home here, she assured him. All of us will. Samuel looked at her with an expression surprisingly mature for his 16 years. I saw you kissing Father yesterday, he said without preamble. I was at my bedroom window. Charlotte felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wasn't ashamed of her feelings, but she hadn't expected to have this conversation so soon. Samuel, she began, but the boy interrupted her. It's all right, he said simply. He smiles more when you're around. You do too. With that perceptive observation, he returned to his drawing, adding details to the expanded house in his vision of Crimson Ridge. Charlotte remained beside him, moved by the boy's simple acceptance and by the undeniable truth of his words. That night, while the house slept, Charlotte went out to the porch. The stars shone with extraordinary clarity in the black sky, and the full moon bathed the landscape with its silver light. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the fresh night air perfumed with sage. She felt rather than heard Nathan's presence behind her. She turned, smiling as she saw him. Couldn't sleep, he explained, joining her in contemplating the night sky. Neither could I, Charlotte admitted. Too many thoughts, good or bad ones. Good, mostly. Strange, but good. Nathan took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. The contact was warm, comforting, like returning to a place you didn't know you'd been looking for. I never thought I'd feel this again, he confessed in a low voice. After Eleanor, I believed that part of me had died with her. Charlotte squeezed his hand, understanding. And I never thought I could belong somewhere to someone. After everything that happened, they looked at each other under the moonlight. Two survivors who had weathered separate storms to meet in this moment. In this place, maybe, said Nathan, drawing her closer. It's not despite our losses, but because of them, that we can value what we've found. Charlotte rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Maybe, she murmured, closing her eyes, Some things must break to be rebuilt in a new way, and so they remained embracing under the starry mantle, two souls who had known the deepest pain, and who now, improbably but undeniably, were finding together the path toward healing, toward hope, toward a new dawn. December came to Crimson Ridge with unusual cold. The distant mountains appeared crowned with white each morning, and breath condensed into small clouds when speaking. In the kitchen, Rosa had hung pine branches and cinnamon that perfumed the environment with festive aromas. Victoria, almost completely recovered though still thin, had become an essential presence at the ranch. Her skill with needle had transformed faded curtains and worn tablecloths. Under her supervision, the house acquired a warmer and more welcoming air, small feminine touches that had been absent since Eleanor's death. One particularly cold morning, while the Rivers sisters enjoyed hot chocolate by the fire, a letter arrived that would change the course of their lives. It came from San Francisco, addressed to Samuel Steele. The boy opened it with trembling fingers of excitement, read quickly, and then passed it to his father, his face illuminated by a radiant smile. "I've been accepted," he announced, his voice vibrant with enthusiasm. "I can start at the Academy of Fine Arts after New Year's." The news was received with exclamations of joy and congratulations. Nathan hugged his son with evident pride, though Charlotte noticed a flash of concern in his eyes. San Francisco was very far away, and Samuel had barely turned 17. Later, when the others had retired, Charlotte found Nathan in his study, examining maps of the route to California. "He's growing up," she said softly, leaning on the doorframe. "It's natural he wants to explore the world." Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair with a tired gesture. "I know, and it's right. He has talent, and there's no way to develop it here. It's just that—" He left the sentence unfinished, but Charlotte understood. "You're afraid of losing him," she completed, approaching to place a hand on his shoulder. "That he'll leave and not return." Nathan covered her hand with his, silently grateful for her understanding. "It's irrational, I know. San Francisco isn't the end of the world. I can visit him. He can return for vacations. Fear is rarely rational," Charlotte pointed out, "especially when it comes to people we love." They looked at each other, aware of the depth of what they had just implicitly acknowledged. Love, that word they hadn't yet pronounced, but that floated between them like an undeniable truth. Samuel's acceptance letter catalyzed a series of decisions that had been gestating for months. The first was about the mine. After long discussions, Charlotte and Victoria agreed to implement the cooperative plan. They hired an honest mining engineer recommended by Judge Tanner and established a fair work system with profit participation for the miners. "We don't want to be Caldwell," Charlotte explained during the first meeting with the workers, many of whom had suffered under the magnate's exploitative regime. "We want this mine to benefit everyone who works in it, not just its owners." The initiative was received with initial skepticism that soon gave way to cautious optimism. By Christmas, the Rivers mine was already in full production, and the first results exceeded expectations. The second important decision was about Samuel. Finally, it was determined that Nathan would accompany him to San Francisco, helping him settle in and staying there for a month to ensure he adapted well. Charlotte and Victoria would stay in charge of the ranch during his absence. "A month seems like a long time," Nathan commented the night they finalized the plans, when he and Charlotte walked under the stars, a habit they had developed in recent weeks. "It will pass quickly," she assured, though the prospect of his absence caused her an empty sensation. "And it's important for Samuel to have that time with you." Nathan stopped, taking her by the shoulders to look at her directly. "I'll return." "Charlotte," he said with intensity, as if he needed her to believe it completely. "I have no doubt about that." Charlotte smiled, raising a hand to touch his rough cheek from incipient beard. "I know," she responded simply. "I trust you." Those three words, apparently simple, contained a world of meaning for both. Trust, especially for someone who had suffered as many betrayals as Charlotte, wasn't a small gift. Christmas Eve, Crimson Ridge transformed. Rosa had prepared a traditional Mexican feast, tamales, pozole, buñuelos bathed in honey. Benjamin had found a small but perfectly formed pine that now adorned the living room, decorated with red ribbons, golden-painted pine cones, and small wooden figures carved by Samuel. It was an intimate but joyful celebration. Dr. Whitmore joined them, bringing an English pudding and a bottle of California wine. After dinner, Samuel showed his latest drawings, increasingly sophisticated. Victoria sang carols accompanied by Nathan, with a harmonica no one knew he possessed. Even Benjamin, normally reserved, told stories of past Christmases with his family in Louisiana before the war. Later, when only embers remained in the fireplace and the others had retired, Nathan took Charlotte's hand and led her to the porch. The air was cold and crystalline, and their breath formed small clouds that dissipated in the darkness. From his pocket, he extracted a small box wrapped in simple paper. "Merry Christmas," he said, offering it with an almost shy expression that contrasted with his usual confidence. Charlotte opened the package with careful fingers. Inside, on a bed of cotton, rested a ring. It wasn't ostentatious or elaborate. A simple silver band with a small opal that changed color under the moonlight. "It was my grandmother's," Nathan explained, his voice deeper than normal. "She wore it until the day she died at 92. She was an extraordinary woman. Strong, stubborn, compassionate. She reminded me of you." Charlotte held the ring between her fingers, feeling its weight, its history. "It's beautiful," she murmured, genuinely moved by the gift and its meaning. "It's not a formal proposal, Nath," then clarified quickly. "At least not yet. It's a promise that when I return from San Francisco, we'll talk about our future, about what we want to build together." Charlotte slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "That seems fair," she responded, looking up at him. "And I have something for you, too." From her own pocket, she pulled an object wrapped in a silk handkerchief that Victoria had helped her embroider. Unwrapping it revealed an antique but perfectly maintained compass. The case was engraved with intricate designs of stars and constellations, and the needle oscillated gently before pointing firmly north. "It was my father's," she explained. "He used it on his expeditions. He said that as long as he had this compass, he would always find his way home." Nathan took the instrument with reverence, understanding the profound meaning of the gift. "I'll guard it as the treasure it is," he promised, his voice charged with emotion. They looked at each other under the moon's silver light, aware they were exchanging much more than physical objects. They were sharing fragments of their pasts, their stories, and in doing so, weaving the beginning of a common story. The kiss that followed was different from the previous ones. It wasn't tentative or exploratory, but sure, deep, full of promises and possibilities. Nathan's hands tangled in Charlotte's hair, while hers clung to his shoulders as if she feared he might vanish in the cold night. When they finally separated, panting and smiling, Charlotte rested her forehead against his. "Find your way back to me," she whispered. "Always," Nathan responded, and in that single word was an oath, as binding as any formal vow. They remained thus, embracing under the winter sky, two souls who had navigated through storms to meet in this moment, in this place. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be distance, challenges, perhaps even misunderstandings. But now they had something neither had expected to find again: hope. And with it, the certainty that whatever happened, they were no longer alone. January brought not only more intense cold, but also the departure of Nathan and Samuel to San Francisco. The morning of farewell dawned clear but frigid, with a thin layer of frost covering the ground like diamond dust. The carriage that would take them to the train station in Prescott waited in front of the house, loaded with trunks and suitcases. Samuel moved with nervous energy, checking for the third time that he had all his drawing materials. Nathan, for his part, maintained an exterior calm that belied the tension in his eyes. The farewells were brief but intense. Rosa gave Samuel a package of freshly baked cookies for the journey, though there were enough to feed a regiment. Benjamin gifted him a hand-carved pocket knife, because a man must be able to fend for himself. Victoria gave him a leather-bound sketchbook with his name engraved. When Charlotte's turn came, she led Samuel a few steps apart. From her pocket, she extracted a small object wrapped in cloth. "I want you to have this," she said, uncovering the locket Samuel had given her months ago, the one containing Eleanor's portrait and a lock of her hair. "Your mother should be with you in this new beginning." The boy's eyes filled with tears as he recognized the locket. "But I gave it to you," he protested weakly, "and now I'm returning it to you." "As a loan?" Charlotte explained gently. "You'll return it to me when you come back. That way I'll be certain you'll return." Samuel nodded, understanding the implicit pact. He hugged Charlotte tightly, and she felt in that embrace the child he still was and the man he was becoming. The farewell with Nathan was more contained, but no less emotional. They stepped aside from the others, seeking a moment of intimacy. 1 month, she reminded him, unnecessarily adjusting his coat collar. It seems like an eternity. It will pass faster than you think, he responded, though his voice betrayed the same uneasiness she felt. I'll take care of Samuel. Make sure he adapts well and return before you notice my absence. Charlotte smiled, knowing they both recognized the small white lie in his words. His absence would be noticed, felt every day. Do you have the compass? She asked, though she knew the answer. As confirmation, Nathan extracted the instrument from his pocket. The winter light drew flashes from the polished metal. I haven't let go of it since you gave it to me, he confessed. And I won't until I'm back. They kissed briefly, aware of the discreet but attentive gazes of the others. A kiss of promise, not farewell. When they separated, Nathan's eyes remained fixed on hers, as if he wanted to memorize every detail of her face. I'll return to you, he said simply. I'll be waiting, she responded, and both knew it was a promise as solemn as any marriage vow. Watching the carriage move away down the path left Charlotte with an emptiness she hadn't anticipated. She had grown so completely accustomed to Nathan and Samuel's presence that their absence seemed to alter the ranch's very balance, as if the air were suddenly lighter, the spaces larger, the sounds more hollow. The first days were the hardest. Charlotte found herself instinctively looking toward Nathan's study when she had a question, or seeking Samuel by the stream where he used to draw. The house seemed bigger, its hallways longer, its rooms more silent, but life at the ranch didn't allow too much time for melancholy. There was livestock to feed, fences to repair, decisions to make about spring planting. Additionally, the mine required constant supervision, with weekly trips to meet with the foreman and review accounting. Victoria proved invaluable company during this period. Her recovery had progressed remarkably, and though she still had to be careful, she could assume responsibilities that lightened Charlotte's burden. She handled correspondence, kept the ranch and mine account books, and supervised domestic affairs with a quiet efficiency that reminded Charlotte of their father's organizational ability. The sisters established a comfortable routine. They breakfasted together at dawn, discussing the day's plans. Then Charlotte would ride out to supervise ranch work, while Victoria handled administration. At sunset, they would meet again, sharing the day's news by the fire, sometimes in Rosa and Benjamin's company, other times just the two of them. It was during one of these evenings that Victoria addressed a topic that had been floating between them. I received another letter from Mr. Jenkins, she commented, referring to the lawyer handling their legal affairs in Prescott. He asks if we've decided what to do with our father's property. Charlotte contemplated the flames, remembering the ruined cabin where they had found the mine documents. She hadn't thought about it since then, too busy with the present to consider that painful fragment of the past. What do you think? She finally asked. Victoria left her sewing on her lap, considering the question. I've been thinking, she began with some hesitation. What if we rebuild it? Not to live there, but as a monument to Father. A place where his memory can endure. The idea resonated in Charlotte with unexpected force. Rebuilding the cabin would be like rebuilding a part of their history, recovering a fragment of their identity that had been lost for too long. I like that idea, she said, feeling warmth expand in her chest. We could plant a garden like the one Mother always wanted. And maybe someday, when all this is more established, she didn't complete the sentence, but Victoria seemed to understand. Someday, perhaps, there would be children running through that garden, children who never knew Thomas Rivers, but would carry his blood and spirit. The weeks passed with exasperating slowness, and at the same time disconcerting speed. January gave way to February, and with it came the first letters from San Francisco. Samuel wrote enthusiastically about the academy, his new friends, the city's wonders. His letters came accompanied by exquisite drawings, the port with its ships from around the world, the elegant mansions of Nob Hill, the diverse faces of his study companions. Nathan's letters were more measured, but no less revealing. He wrote about Samuel with evident pride, about the city with certain amazement, and about Charlotte with an intimacy that made her blush even in her room's privacy. He related his day's details as if they were conversing at sunset on the porch, and concluded each letter with the same promise: "I'll return to you." One afternoon, while sorting newly arrived correspondence, Victoria found an envelope addressed to both of them, with a San Francisco bank letterhead. She opened it with curiosity, and then called Charlotte urgently. "You won't believe this," she said, extending the document. "It's a purchase offer for the mine." An obscene amount. Charlotte read the letter with incredulity. The Pacific Mining Company was offering a sum that would have made Caldwell's fortune seem modest. The kind of money that would allow the Rivers sisters to live in opulence for the rest of their lives, without worries or obligations. "What do you think?" asked Victoria, carefully studying her sister's face. Charlotte reread the offer, considering its implications. With that money, they could move to San Francisco or even Europe. They could travel, study, experience everything that had been denied them during their youth. It was a freedom that just weeks earlier would have seemed an unattainable dream. And yet, "No," she said finally, returning the letter to her sister. "We won't sell." Victoria didn't seem surprised. "Because of the cooperative?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Because of the cooperative, because of Father, because of what it represents," Charlotte confirmed. "And because—" she hesitated, seeking the right words. "Because I no longer need to escape. I don't want to start over somewhere else. I want to build something here on the foundations we already have." Victoria smiled, a luminous smile that illuminated her increasingly healthy face. "I hoped you'd say that," she confessed. "I feel the same. This place, these people, they've become our home, haven't they?" Charlotte nodded, suddenly feeling light, as if she had made a decision she didn't know she needed to make. Crimson Ridge, Silver Creek, even her father's ruined cabin in the mountains, they were more than places. They were the coordinates of her identity, points on the map of her soul. That night she wrote to Nathan about the rejected offer. "Some would say we're crazy," she concluded her letter, "but I think you'll understand. I've wandered too long to desire departure, now that I've finally found my place in the world." February advanced toward its end, when one morning Charlotte woke with an inexplicable feeling of anticipation. There was nothing particular about the day that justified such feeling. It was a common late winter day, with clear skies promising a cool but sunny day. She dressed and went down to the kitchen, where she found Rosa preparing breakfast with her usual efficiency. "Good morning, child," the woman greeted, using the affectionate nickname she had adopted for Charlotte, despite her having left youth behind. "There's fresh coffee." Charlotte served herself a cup, grateful for the comforting aroma. She was about to ask about Victoria when the main door opened. For a moment her heart jumped, thinking it might be Nathan, returning earlier than expected. But it was Benjamin, removing his hat as he entered. "Good morning, Miss Charlotte," he greeted with his usual formality, though his eyes shone with contained emotion. "It seems we'll have visitors. I just saw a carriage approaching on the main road." Charlotte felt the morning's strange anticipation intensify. She went out to the porch, squinting against the morning light. Indeed, in the distance, she could distinguish a dust cloud indicating a vehicle's approach. While she waited, she unconsciously brought her hand to the ring Nathan had given her at Christmas. It had become a habit, a gesture she made when she thought of him, when she missed him, when she needed to remind herself that what they had found together was real and would endure. The carriage approached, and now she could distinguish it was a rental, similar to the one that had taken Nathan and Samuel to the station. Her heart began to beat faster. Could it be? When the vehicle finally stopped in front of the house, the door opened and a man descended. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face bronzed by sun despite the season. Nathan Charlotte wouldn't remember later having gone down the porch steps. She only knew that suddenly she was in his arms, breathing his familiar scent now mixed with unknown fragrances. The sea, the city, the long journey. "You're here," she murmured against his chest. "You've returned." Nathan separated her slightly, only enough to look into her eyes, to make sure she was real, that they were both really there, reunited after separation. "I told you I would return to you," he responded, his deep voice charged with emotion, and then he kissed her, without caring that Benjamin and Rosa might be watching from the house, without worrying about the coachman unloading luggage, without thinking of anything but the miraculous fact of being together again. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Charlotte noticed an important detail. "Where's Samuel?" she asked, searching for the boy with her gaze. Nathan's smile widened. "In San Francisco, where he should be. Settled, adapted, and flourishing. So happy I almost felt guilty for missing him." "Did you return early?" Charlotte mentally counted the days. At least a week remained before the agreed month was completed. Nathan extracted the compass from his pocket, holding it in his palm. The needle oscillated gently before pointing firmly north. "And toward her. I discovered I no longer needed more time there," he explained. "Samuel has found his path, and I needed to return to mine." At that moment, Victoria appeared on the porch, her expression of surprise quickly transforming into a welcome smile. Behind her, Rosa and Benjamin observed the scene with evident approval. As they went up to the house, with Nathan relating fragments of his journey and asking about ranch news, Charlotte felt something settle inside her. A piece that had been floating freely finally found its place, completing a puzzle she didn't know she was assembling. That night, after a festive dinner hastily prepared by Rosa to celebrate Nathan's return, they found themselves alone on the porch. The night was clear, with a sky so full of stars they seemed about to spill over the earth. "I missed you every day," Nathan confessed, taking her hand in his. "San Francisco is impressive, but I felt like a fish out of water. Too many people, too much noise, too much civilization." Charlotte smiled, understanding perfectly. She, who had lived years in complete solitude, now also found crowds overwhelming. "Samuel seems happy there, according to his letters," she commented. "He is. He's young, absorbs everything like a sponge. He has friends, teachers who appreciate his talent. He's where he should be, at least for now." "And you?" asked Charlotte, seeking his gaze in the silver penumbra. "Are you where you should be?" Nathan brought Charlotte's hand to his lips, gently kissing the ring he had given her. "Exactly where I should be," he confirmed. "Where I belong." They remained thus a moment, letting silence communicate what words couldn't. Then Nathan seemed to remember something. He searched in his jacket's inner pocket and extracted an envelope. "I brought you something from San Francisco," he said, handing it to her. "Besides the obvious trinkets that are in my luggage." Charlotte opened the envelope with curiosity. Inside was a legal document, written in formal language, that at first was difficult for her to understand. But as she read, its meaning became clear. It was a deed in the name of Charlotte and Victoria Rivers for a parcel of land adjacent to Crimson Ridge. "I don't understand," she said, confused. "Did you buy land for us?" Nathan shook his head. "It's the old Reynolds property. It's been abandoned for years. When I learned it was available, I thought—" He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "I thought if you decided to stay, if we decided to build something together, that land would be perfect for expanding the ranch. But it's in your and Victoria's name. It's yours, regardless of what you decide about us." Charlotte reread the document, assimilating its implications. It was an extraordinary gift, but more than that, it was a declaration of intentions, a vision of shared future. "It's perfect," she said finally, looking up at him. "And yes, I want to build something with you, Nathan Steele. Something that lasts." Nathan drew her to him, and in that embrace Charlotte felt all the promises that didn't need to be spoken. Promises of shared days, of working shoulder to shoulder, of nights like this under Arizona's infinite firmament. Promises of a life she had never dreamed possible, but that now stretched before her like a path illuminated by stars. Spring came to Crimson Ridge with an explosion of life. Wildflowers dotted the previously arid slopes, streams ran full with mountain snowmelt, and the air was perfumed with scents of renewed earth and fresh vegetation. It was, Charlotte thought while contemplating the sunrise from her favorite hill, a perfect metaphor for her own life. After a long winter of solitude and survival, spring had finally come to her heart, bringing possibilities she had never imagined. The months since Nathan's return had passed in a comfortable but never monotonous routine. They worked together during the day, expanding the ranch, improving the mining cooperative, building something that went beyond their individual dreams. At night, they shared the intimacy of conversations by the fire, walks under the stars, and a love that grew with the solidity of the surrounding mountains. Victoria also flourished. Her health, completely restored, now allowed her to assume more active responsibilities. She had discovered a talent for administration and negotiation that surprised everyone, even herself. Under her supervision, the Rivers mine had become a model of fair and efficient operation, generating profits that were equitably distributed between workers and owners. Additionally, she had started a small personal project, a school for the children of miners and ranchers in the region. It began modestly, with classes in a borrowed room in Silver Creek, but soon grew to require its own building. Victor hired dedicated 3 afternoons a week to teaching reading, writing, and basic arithmetic to children who would otherwise have grown up without formal education. "I never thought teaching would make me so happy," she confessed to Charlotte one afternoon, as they returned together from school. "Seeing their faces when they understand something new, it's like witnessing small miracles." Charlotte smiled, recognizing in her sister the same passion that had characterized their father. Thomas Rivers had valued knowledge above almost everything, and had instilled in his daughters that same reverence for learning. Samuel's letters arrived regularly, increasingly sophisticated both in content and in the drawings that accompanied them. His talent had been recognized at the academy, and a local gallery owner had expressed interest in exhibiting some of his works in autumn. "But I'll return for summer," he wrote in each letter, a reminder that, despite his success in the city, Crimson Ridge remained his home. In a particularly significant letter, addressed specifically to Charlotte, Samuel had included a portrait of her and Nathan. The quality was extraordinary, capturing not only their physical features, but also the essence of their relationship: Charlotte's strength, Nathan's solidity, and between them, that invisible but undeniable bond that united them. At the bottom of the drawing, Samuel had written simply, "My family." Charlotte had cried seeing it, moved not only by the portrait's beauty, but by the complete acceptance it represented. That same day, she framed the drawing and hung it in the living room, where she could see it every day as a reminder of how far she had come since that humiliating auction in Silver Creek's center. One morning in early May, Charlotte and Victoria traveled to the mountains to supervise their father's cabin reconstruction. The project was progressing well. The structure was almost complete, respecting the original design but with subtle improvements: larger windows to allow light entry, a wider porch, a solid roof that would resist winter storms. "It's strange," Victoria commented, while touring the space that would soon be habitable again. "I remember so little of this place. I was so small when everything happened." Charlotte put an arm around her sister's shoulders. The age difference between them had seemed enormous during childhood, but now, as adults, that gap had narrowed almost to disappearance. "I'll tell you everything I remember," she promised. How Father carved animal figures from wood during winter nights, how he read aloud by the fire, how he knew the name of every star in the sky. Victoria rested her head on her sister's shoulder, a gesture of trust and connection. "I'd like to remember him better," she confessed. "Sometimes when I try to visualize his face, I only see shadows." "I have something that might help," Charlotte responded, extracting from her pocket a small object wrapped in soft cloth. It was a miniature, painted portrait of Thomas Rivers they had found among the documents in the iron box. Victoria took it with trembling hands, studying the familiar yet strange features: the same green eyes she and Charlotte had inherited, the same firm line of jaw, the same expression of determination tempered by gentleness. "He looks like you," she said, looking up at her sister. "Around the eyes and in the way he holds his head," Charlotte smiled, moved by the observation. "And you have his smile," she responded, "and his patience, which I never inherited." The sisters shared a soft laugh, that kind of laughter that is both joyful and melancholic, that celebrates what one has while acknowledging what has been lost. Returning to the ranch, they found Nathan and Benjamin supervising construction of a new stable on the newly acquired property. It was an ambitious project, designed to house more horses and allow expansion of the breeding business Nathan had begun developing. "Pinto mares we bought in Prescott will arrive next week," he explained while showing Charlotte the progress. "With them and the Appaloosa stallion, we'll have the base for an excellent breeding line." Charlotte listened with genuine interest. Though her experience with horses was limited to riding, she had developed an appreciation for the nuances of breeding and selection that Nathan knew so well. She liked seeing him like this, animated, focused, building something new from his knowledge and passion. That night, while they all dined together in the expanded kitchen, one of the first projects Charlotte and Nathan had undertaken together, Rosa announced that her niece would come visit from Sonora. Guadalupe is a good girl, she explained, serving generous portions of stew. Her mother, my sister, died last winter, and the poor thing has no one else. I've written offering her a home here if it seems all right. Of course she can stay, Nathan responded immediately. There's room to spare, and we can always use an extra pair of willing hands. Charlotte nodded in agreement, noting the relief expression on Rosa's face. The cook had been with them so many years, she was more family than employee, and her happiness mattered as much as anyone else's at Crimson Ridge. Later, when everyone had retired, Charlotte found Nathan on the porch, contemplating the night sky as he used to do when he had something on his mind. "A penny for your thoughts," she said, joining him at the railing. Nathan smiled. That kind of slow and complete smile that only appeared when they were alone. "I was thinking about how much this place has changed," he responded, embracing with a gesture the ranch that extended before them. Not just physically, but in its essence. When Eleanor died, I thought Crimson Ridge would never feel like home again. It was just a place where Samuel and I existed, where we worked, but not where we really lived. He paused, seeking the right words to express something complex. And now, he continued, his voice softer, now it's more home than it ever was. There's life here, future. Charlotte understood perfectly. She, who had lived years without a place to belong, deeply valued the sense of home they had created together. It's strange, isn't it? She reflected. How losses shape us, make us think we'll never be whole again. And then, without really seeking it, we find new forms of integrity. Nathan looked at her with an expression Charlotte had come to recognize, wonder mixed with tenderness, as if he still couldn't completely believe they had found each other. "I've been waiting for the right moment," he said finally, turning to face her completely. "But I realize any moment is right as long as we're together." From his pocket, he extracted a small wooden box carved by hand. It wasn't fine jewelry like those found in San Francisco or Boston, but an artisanal piece, worked by hand with evident care and detail. "I carved it myself," he explained at Charlotte's surprised look. "Samuel taught me some techniques during winter." He opened the box, revealing a ring different from the one she already wore. This one was more elaborate. A gold band with small turquoise inlays, forming a design similar to the constellations engraved on the compass she had given him. "Charlotte Rivers," he said, his voice firm despite the evident emotion in his eyes, "would you do me the honor of being my wife, of officially sharing this life we've already begun building together?" Though the proposal wasn't unexpected, Charlotte felt something expand in her chest, an emotion so intense it momentarily stole her breath. She thought of the girl she had been, of the solitary woman she had become, of the long and painful path that had led her to this moment. To this man, yes, she responded simply, because there was no need for more words. Everything important had already been said between them, not with declarations but with actions, with constant presence, with trust shared day after day. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, next to the one she already wore. The two together told a story. The first, a legacy from the past, a promise of continuity. The second, created specifically for her, a symbol of a custom-designed future. The kiss that followed was different from any other they had shared. There was in it a quiet certainty, a recognition that what they had found wasn't a passing fire, but a constant ember, the kind of warmth that sustains and nourishes, that remains even on the coldest nights. "When?" asked Charlotte when they finally separated. "When you want," Nathan responded. "Tomorrow. Next month. When Samuel returns for summer. It doesn't really matter, because in all the ways that matter, we're already a family." Charlotte rested her head on Nathan's shoulder, contemplating the stars that seemed to shine with special intensity that night. When Samuel returns, she decided, so we can all be together. And so, under Arizona's vast sky, they sealed their commitment, not only with rings and words, but with the silent promise to continue building day by day, the home they had both searched for so long without knowing it existed. Summer arrived at Crimson Ridge with its characteristic intensity. The sun blazed mercilessly from a cloudless sky, turning the landscape into a mosaic of ochres and golds that shimmered under the undulating heat. The streams, abundant in spring, reduced to crystal threads where livestock, Kay and wildlife congregated in the hottest hours. For Charlotte, this summer held special meaning. It not only marked a full year since her arrival at Crimson Ridge, thus closing a cycle of seasons that had transformed her life, but also brought two long-awaited events: Samuel's return and her wedding to Nathan. The carriage transporting Samuel from the train station arrived on a particularly hot June afternoon. Charlotte, Nathan, Victoria, and the others waited on the porch, trying to catch any occasional breeze that might relieve the suffocating heat. When the vehicle finally stopped in front of the house, it wasn't only Samuel who descended. Beside him stepped down a young woman of approximately his age, with dark hair gathered in an elaborate braid and lively eyes that observed everything with barely contained curiosity. "Father." "Charlotte." Samuel ran toward them, as effusive as they had never seen him. He hugged them both simultaneously, a gesture that would have been impossible for the silent and withdrawn boy he had been a year ago. "I missed you so much." When they finally separated, Samuel turned toward the young woman who remained beside the carriage. Visibly nervous, "I want to introduce you to Elena Morales," he said, with a tone that tried to be casual, but betrayed deeper emotion. "She's my companion at the academy, an extraordinary artist." The young woman approached, extending her hand timidly. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," she said with an accent that revealed her Mexican origins. "Samuel talks constantly about his family in Crimson Ridge." Charlotte noticed the blush on Samuel's cheeks, the way his eyes followed Elena even when he spoke with others. She recognized the signs because she had seen them in herself in the mirror during her first months with Nathan. "Why didn't you tell me you'd bring a guest?" asked Nathan later, when both men were alone preparing Samuel's luggage. The young man shrugged, trying to appear unconcerned. "It was a last-minute decision. Helena mentioned she had nowhere to spend the summer, since her family is in Mexico, and she can't return due to political complications. I couldn't leave her alone in San Francisco." Nathan looked at his son with a mixture of pride and amusement. "So you simply invited her to come home with us?" "Without consulting us." Samuel had the decency to look repentant. "I'm sorry. I should have asked first. It's just that—" He hesitated, seeking the right words. "Elena is important to me. I wanted you to meet her." Nathan placed a hand on his son's shoulder, now almost as tall as him. "It's all right. There's room to spare, and she seems like a charming young woman. Just next time write to us first, agreed?" Samuel nodded, visibly relieved. Then, as if remembering something important, he searched in his pocket and extracted a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "I almost forgot," he said, handing it to his father. "I found it in an antique shop in Chinatown. I thought it would be perfect." Nathan unwrapped the package, revealing a silver brooch with intricate floral designs and a small pearl in the center. "It's for Charlotte," Samuel explained. "You know, something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. The pearl has that bluish tone, see? I thought it could be her something blue for the wedding." Nathan contemplated the brooch. Then his son marveled at the consideration of the gesture. "It's perfect," he said finally, closing his hand around the brooch. "And it will mean a lot to her that it comes from you." Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Charlotte and Victoria helped Rosa prepare dinner. Rosa's niece, Guadalupe, a vivacious young woman of about 20, had arrived 2 weeks earlier and had already integrated perfectly into ranch life. "So the wedding will be in 2 weeks?" she asked, cutting vegetables with the same efficiency as her aunt. "Do you have your dress yet, Charlotte?" Charlotte smiled, exchanging a complicit look with Victoria. "I have it. Victoria has been working on it in secret, so Nathan won't see it beforehand. It's an adaptation of a dress that belonged to our mother," Victoria explained. "We found it in a trunk in the cabin. It was in surprising good condition, considering the circumstances." Charlotte remembered the moment they had unearthed the trunk, hidden under the floor of the rebuilt cabin. It had been an unexpected discovery, a treasure of family memories, photographs, letters, small personal objects, and Rose River's wedding dress, carefully preserved in linen and dried lavender. The dress was simple but elegant, in a style that had gone out of fashion, but that, with Victoria's expert modifications, was timeless. The yellowed lace had been bleached, the skirt slightly redesigned to fit Charlotte's taller figure, and the sleeves, originally long and fitted, shortened to better suit Arizona summer heat. "You'll look beautiful," Guadalupe assured with the direct frankness that characterized her. "Mr. Steele will faint when he sees you." The women laughed, and Charlotte felt a wave of gratitude for this extended family she had found. Strong women, each in her own way, who had welcomed and supported her as she had never experienced since her father's death. The days before the wedding passed in a whirlwind of activity. All of Silver Creek seemed involved in the preparations. The ceremony would take place in the town church, recently expanded thanks to donations from the Rivers Mining Cooperative. The subsequent reception would be celebrated at Crimson Ridge, under a tent specially built for the occasion. Elena, Samuel's friend, proved to be not only a talented artist, but also a natural organizer. She took charge of decoration, creating garlands of wildflowers and paper lanterns that would transform the ranch into an almost magical space. She has a good eye for color and composition, Victoria commented to Charlotte, while they watched the young woman direct a group of workers in placing tables and chairs. And Samuel looks at her as if she hung the moon in the sky. Charlotte smiled, recognizing the accuracy of the observation. She reminds me of myself at her age, she confessed. That intensity, that barely contained passion. I hope she finds the path to happiness with fewer painful detours than I had. Victoria squeezed her sister's hand, a gesture of understanding and solidarity. She will. She has something we didn't have. An intact family that supports her, that believes in her. Charlotte nodded, grateful once again for the unexpected path that had led her here, to this moment, to this life she had never imagined possible. The night before the wedding, when everything was prepared, and only the next day remained to wait, Charlotte found herself restless, unable to sleep. She silently left the house and walked to the hill, where she used to go to think, to remember, to find herself. The night was perfect, with a full moon bathing the landscape in liquid silver, and a sky so crowded with stars, they seemed about to spill over the earth. She sat on her usual rock, hugging her knees to her chest, and let her mind wander freely. She thought of her father, how he would have enjoyed this moment, how proud he would be to see his daughters not only survive but flourish. She thought of the years in the desert, of the wild and solitary woman she had been, of how that experience, however hard, had shaped her into who she was now, and she thought of Nathan, of the improbable man who had bought the canyon sorceress at a public auction, and offered her not only shelter, but also respect, understanding, and finally, a transforming love. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a familiar voice spoke behind her. "I knew I'd find you here." Charlotte turned to see Nathan standing a few meters away, respecting her space but offering his presence. "Isn't it supposed to be bad luck to see the bride before the wedding?" she asked with a smile. Nathan approached, sitting beside her on the wide rock. "I think we've had enough bad luck for a lifetime," he responded. "A little superstition isn't going to scare us now." They remained silent for a moment, contemplating the night landscape together. That same landscape they had learned to love from different perspectives, and now shared as a common language. "Nervous?" Nathan finally asked. Charlotte considered the question seriously before responding. "Not about the wedding itself," she said finally. "It's more like a kind of wonder. As if part of me still can't believe this is real, that it's my life." Nathan nodded, understanding perfectly. "I know what you mean. There are days I wake up expecting to find myself alone again, lost in that limbo where I was after Eleanor. And then I see you and it's like the world makes sense again." Charlotte rested her head on Nathan's shoulder, feeling the familiar and comforting contact of his solid body next to hers. "Do you think we'll ever stop feeling like this? Like all this is a fragile dream that could vanish?" Nathan surrounded her shoulders with an arm, drawing her closer. "Maybe not," he responded honestly, "and perhaps that's good. Maybe that awareness of how precious and extraordinary what we've found is helps us value it every day. Never take it for granted." Charlotte looked up at him, studying in the moon's silver light that face she had come to know so mately, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the almost imperceptible scar above his right eyebrow, the way his mouth curved slightly upward even at rest, as if it contained a secret smile. "I love you." "Nathan Steele," she said simply, the words familiar but never worn by use. "With everything I am, with everything I've been, with everything I will be." Nathan inclined his head, resting his forehead against hers in a gesture of intimacy they had developed during their year together. "And I love you, Charlotte Rivers," he responded. "Beyond words, beyond time, beyond everything I thought possible." They returned to the house hand in hand, walking slowly under the starry mantle, savoring these last moments before their lives would officially change, though in all the ways that truly mattered, they were already one. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and surprisingly cool for midsummer. A gentle breeze swayed the curtains in the room where Charlotte prepared, assisted by Victoria, Guadalupe, and Elena. The dress, once worn, was even more beautiful than Charlotte had imagined. The antique lace, now a creamy white, contrasted perfectly with her bronzed skin and made her hair's fire stand out, which Victoria had gathered in a loose chignon adorned with small wildflowers. "Something's missing," said Victoria, critically studying her sister. "Something blue." At that moment someone knocked softly at the door. It was Samuel, elegant in his new suit with an expression of unusual nervousness on his habitually confident face. "May I come in?" he asked, barely poking his head through. "I have something for Charlotte." The women exchanged amused glances at his evident discomfort at interrupting feminine preparations, but Charlotte gestured for him to enter. "You're beautiful," the boy said with sincere admiration. "Father is going to—" He interrupted himself, blushing slightly. "Well, he's going to be very impressed." From his pocket he extracted a small box and handed it to Charlotte. "It's from Father and me," he explained. "To complete your outfit." Charlotte opened the box, revealing the silver brooch with the bluish pearl. It was a delicate and beautiful piece, with an antique air that perfectly complemented the dress. "Oh, Samuel," she murmured, genuinely moved. "It's precious. The pearl is blue," he pointed out proudly. "For the tradition, you know. And we thought you could use it to fasten the veil." Victoria took the brooch, examining it with an expert eye. "It's perfect," she declared. "Exactly what was missing." While Victoria arranged the brooch in place, securing the lace veil, Charlotte looked at Samuel. This young man who had gone from being a silent and wounded boy to a man in formation. "Sensitive and considerate, thank you," she said, briefly taking his hand. "Not just for the brooch, but for everything. For accepting me into your life, into your family." Samuel squeezed her hand, his eyes reflecting an understanding that went beyond his years. "You're the one who gave us back our lives," he responded simply. "Father and me, I could never thank you enough for that." The moment was interrupted by Benjamin's arrival, elegant as never before in a black suit that dramatically contrasted with his white hair. "The carriage is ready." "Ladies," he announced with his usual dignity, though his eyes shone with contained emotion. "And if I may say so, Miss Charlotte, I have never seen a more beautiful bride." The journey to the church passed in a strange state of suspended calm for Charlotte. She observed the familiar landscape through the veil, and it seemed to see it with new eyes, as if every detail, a blooming cactus, a hawk soaring high, the distant silhouette of mountains were a sign, a message, a blessing for the path she was about to undertake. The small church of Silver Creek was packed. Not only were the town's inhabitants attending, but also mine workers, ranchers from the surroundings, and even some travelers who had arrived specifically for the wedding of the canyon sorceress, whose story had become a kind of local legend. But Charlotte barely registered the crowd. Upon entering on Benjamin's arm, who had proudly assumed the role of giving her away, her eyes immediately fixed on Nathan, waiting for her at the altar. Tall, handsome in his formal suit, with an expression of reverent amazement that made her heart race like a young girl's. Beside him stood Samuel, as his best man, and next to the space reserved for her waited Victoria, who had walked down the aisle before her. The service was simple but deeply moving. Pastor Bennett, an elderly man who had known Thomas Rivers and remembered Charlotte as a child, officiated the ceremony with words that spoke of redemption, second chances, love that blooms in the most improbable places. When the moment for vows came, Nathan took Charlotte's hands in his, looking directly into her eyes through the veil. "Charlotte Rivers," he began, his deep voice charged with emotion. "I found you when I didn't know I was searching. You saved me when I didn't know I needed saving. I promise you today, before all these witnesses, but more importantly before yourself, that I will walk beside you every day granted to me, that I will share your joys and sorrows, your triumphs and struggles, that I will never forget the extraordinary gift of having you in my life, and that I will work every day to be worthy of your trust, your strength, your love." Charlotte breathed deeply, trying to contain the tears that threatened to overflow her eyes. "Nathan Steele," she responded, her voice firm despite the emotion that overwhelmed her. "I came to you with nothing but my name and my scars. You offered me not only shelter but also respect, not only security but also purpose. I promise you today that I will honor the trust you have placed in me, that I will build with you a home not only of walls and roofs, but of laughter and comfort, of shared work and common dreams, that I will love not only the man you are, but also who you have been and who you will be, that I will walk beside you on the path that remains, no matter where it leads us, knowing that as long as we're together, we'll be home. The exchange of rings, the pastor's final words, the kiss that sealed their union. Everything passed in a state of almost dreamlike intensity for Charlotte. It was as if every sense were amplified, every detail engraving itself in her memory with crystalline clarity that she knew she would preserve until her last day. The reception at Crimson Ridge was a celebration that Silver Creek would remember for years. Under the tent, decorated with Elena's garlands and lanterns, with long tables arranged in a horseshoe around a central space for dancing, guests ate, drank, and celebrated well into the night. There was music, provided by a string quartet from Prescott, and later complemented by local musicians with accordions and guitars. There was dancing, from the formal waltzes Nathan had learned in his youth in Tennessee, to the lively polkas and Mexican rhythms that Rosa and Guadalupe taught to all willing to learn. And there were stories. As the night progressed and wine flowed freely, guests began sharing anecdotes about Charlotte and Nathan, some amusing, others touching, all weaving the narrative of two lives that, against all odds, had found their way to each other. In a quiet moment, while guests dispersed around the ranch in small groups conversing and laughing, Charlotte found herself momentarily alone. She had retired to the porch to enjoy an instant of silence, observing the celebration from a certain distance. She felt rather than heard someone's presence beside her, and turning found Dr. Whitmore, elegant in a dark blue dress that accentuated the paleness of her eyes. A beautiful wedding. Mrs. Steele, the doctor commented, using Charlotte's new surname for the first time, and an extraordinary transformation, if I may observe. Charlotte inclined her head in acknowledgement of the compliment. I have much to thank you for, Doctor, she responded. Without you, my sister. The doctor made a dismissive gesture. Victoria is a remarkable woman. She would have found her way with or without my help, just like you. They remained silent for a moment, contemplating the party that continued under the illuminated tent. You know, the doctor continued finally, when I first saw you at that auction, I thought you were the freest woman I had ever known despite the chains. Charlotte looked at her with curiosity, intrigued by this unexpected perspective. Free? They were selling me like livestock. And yet there was something in you that refused to be possessed, the doctor explained. An indomitable essence, an inner certainty that not even public humiliation could touch. I saw it then, and I see it now. You've changed, certainly. You've softened, you've healed, but that essential freedom is still there. Charlotte reflected on these words, recognizing their truth. Even in her most desperate moments, she had never completely surrendered herself, her core of strength and determination. Thank you for seeing it, she said simply, and for telling me today. The doctor smiled, a gesture that transformed her habitually serious face. Doctors don't just heal bodies, Mrs. Steele. Sometimes we're also witnesses to the healing of the soul, and that's always a privilege. With a slight nod, the doctor moved away, leaving Charlotte with her thoughts. She didn't remain alone for long, however. Soon she felt familiar arms surrounding her waist from behind, and Nathan's warm breath on her neck. Escaping from our own wedding? He murmured, his voice tinged with amusement. Charlotte leaned back against him, enjoying the solid and comforting contact of his body. Just taking a moment to absorb it all, she responded. To remember. Remember what? The journey. How we got here. Everything we lost and found in the process. Nathan gently turned her until they faced each other, his eyes reflecting the golden light emanating from the house and garden lamps. A long journey, he commented, tenderly caressing her cheek. But every step was worth it if it brought us here. Charlotte nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. Every loss, every pain, every moment of desperation had been a necessary step on the path that had led her to this night, to this man, to this life she had never imagined possible. Ready to return to the party? Asked Nathan. I think it's almost time for the last dance. Charlotte smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "Ready for whatever comes," she responded. "As long as we're together." And so, hand in hand, they returned to the celebration, to the music and laughter, to the family they had built from broken fragments and renewed hopes, to the life they had chosen to share, under Arizona's vast sky and beyond, in that unmapped territory that is the shared future. As they danced the night's last waltz, with stars shining above them and the people they loved surrounding them, Charlotte thought of that day in Silver Creek's bandstand, of the auction that had seemed like the end of everything and that, miraculously, had been only the beginning. The circle had been completed. The canyon sorceress had found her home, her tribe, her purpose, and what had once been a story of loss and survival had transformed, step by step, into a story of healing, redemption, and finally, 5 years later, the morning sun filtered through the curtains of the master bedroom at Crimson Ridge, painting golden stripes across the wooden floor. Charlotte woke slowly, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly where their first child grew. At 32, she had never imagined she would experience the miracle of creating new life. But here she was, 6 months along, glowing with a happiness she had never thought possible. Nathan was already up, as was his habit, but she could hear his voice from the kitchen below, mixed with the familiar sounds of the household coming to life. Samuel's laughter drifted up. He had returned from San Francisco the previous week with Elena, now his wife of 2 years, to spend the summer helping with the ranch and preparing for their own move to Arizona in the fall. Charlotte rose carefully, her body adjusting to the changes pregnancy had brought. Through the window she could see the expanded ranch, new buildings, more pastures, the successful horse breeding program that had become Nathan's pride. In the distance, smoke rose from the chimney of her father's rebuilt cabin, where Victoria now lived with her husband, Dr. James Morrison, whom she had married the previous spring. The mine continued to prosper under the cooperative system, funding not only the workers' livelihoods, but also the school Victoria had established, which now educated children from 3 surrounding counties. The river's name, once associated with shame and false accusations, had become synonymous with justice and community progress. Downstairs, Charlotte found her extended family gathered around the breakfast table, Nathan discussing the day's work with Benjamin, who, despite his advancing years, remained an essential part of the ranch, Rosa and Guadalupe preparing food with practiced efficiency, Samuel sketching in his ever-present notebook while Elena read from a letter. The conversation paused as she entered, all faces turning toward her with smiles of welcome and concern. "How are you feeling this morning?" Nathan asked, immediately at her side to help her into her chair. "Strong," she said, and meant it. "Ready for whatever this day brings." It was the same answer she had given him on their wedding day, and it had become something of a ritual between them. Each morning, the same question, the same response, a daily affirmation of their commitment to face life together. After breakfast, Charlotte walked to her favorite hill, moving more slowly now, but still drawn to the place where she had always found clarity. From there, she could see the full scope of what they had built, not just the physical structures, but the community the lives changed, the legacy they were creating. The child within her stirred, as if sensing the significance of the moment. Boy or girl, this baby would grow up knowing love, security, and purpose. They would hear stories of their grandmother Rose and grandfather Thomas, of the struggle for justice, of love found in unlikely places. They would understand that their parents had come from brokenness and built something beautiful. Nathan found her there, as he always did when she needed to think. "Any regrets?" he asked, settling beside her on the familiar rock. Charlotte considered the question, as she always did when he asked it. Did she regret the years of hardship? The loss of her father? The time spent in the wilderness? "No," she said finally, "not a single one. Every step led us here to this moment, to this life. To this child." She took his hand and placed it on her belly, and they felt together the flutter of movement within. "What do you think the future holds?" Nathan asked. Charlotte looked out over the land that had become her world, toward the mountains that had once been her refuge and were now her home's guardians. "I think," she said slowly, "that the best is yet to come." As if in response to her words, the baby kicked strongly and they both laughed. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried as it circled overhead, and the wind carried the scent of sage and new growth. The canyon sorceress had found her magic was real after all, not in spells or supernatural powers, but in the alchemy of love that transforms the broken into the beautiful, the lost into the found, the solitary into the cherished, and in the growing life within her, Charlotte knew that their story was not ending, but beginning anew.